Welcome back to the program. Thanks for staying with us. You're watching the Monday Report, our discussion on the state of the economy with the chair of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, David Ndii, continues at the moment. And you can weigh in. Remember, SMS line is 22422, hashtag Monday Report. I'll be reading your feedback shortly. David Ndii, you've made some startling pronouncements this evening. One, you've told us we're not in an alarming state as an economy, despite indicators pointing contrary to that. You've also told us the government is wasteful, and you're focusing on big bang impact projects as your key priorities. But I then wonder what this pronouncement by the Deputy President on the 12th of March was all about, when he said that David Ndii doesn't pronounce policy. He's simply an advisor. What is your role in the government, David Ndii?
Yes, I'm an advisor. I don't pronounce policy. If you pay attention to the things I've said, I have not pronounced policy. I have given you a sense of the kind of analysis and thinking that is informing policy. But as to pronouncing policy, policy is only made when it goes to cabinet as a cabinet paper and then it's adopted. So clearly, I don't pronounce policy, but I inform a lot of policy. My job and my team's job is to ensure that policy, and the president in particular, makes policy on the best analysis and evidence that's available. Having said that, the issue on which the deputy president pronounced himself,
and it was on electricity,
and why we were at cross purposes, is actually not a policy issue. It's a regulatory issue. The decision on electricity tariff is made by an independent regulator.
EPRA?
EPRA. It's independent. There's a process of application by the KPLC, and that process goes on. And by the time I was commenting on it, that process had been completed. So I was quite aware that the decision was going to be one of increasing the tariffs. So perhaps the deputy president wasn't quite aware that that is actually not a policy issue. Otherwise, it is absolutely correct that I was just providing public.
Sounds like you're saying you were right and he wasn't.
No. He's right that I don't pronounce policy. And I'm making the point that I wasn't. I hadn't pronounced.
But you say you were right on the issue that...
No, I had not pronounced policy.
You simply reflected on what...
I simply was explaining people, look, a policy tariff review has been completed. It is going to happen in the next couple of days. Already the date for announcement had been made. It said it was going to start from the 1st of April. So I was just sort of saying something which was quite obvious. But it wasn't a policy decision. It was a tariff review which was in the public domain. But of course, I pay more attention to economic issues than the deputy president does, understandably.
So the fact that you're, I don't want to use the word merely an advisor, but that could be one way to put it. Is your counsel being adopted, or does it get caught up in politics of the...
No, we don't. Our work is actually, we adopted a presidential system, but we actually haven't strengthened the presidency so that it can do what presidents do in a presidential system, including specifically providing policy leadership. Yeah, if you look at the sort of White House where we adopted this system, it has 1,300 professionals just supporting the president in terms of policy. So this is actually the first real policy institution for a presidential system that we have established. And it's turning out to be very useful, because what we are able to do, we are a very strong team, is that we are actually able to support not just the president, but also backstop the ministers on things they don't have time to do. Because ministers do a lot of firefighting. So when there are things that require a lot of technical work, we are able to work with the technical people in the ministries as the minister, meets all sorts of people and goes to meetings and all manner of things. And for example, I don't think we could have ministry on its own would have been able to do, for instance, the oil transaction that we completed last month, which is actually going to help us quite a bit. And a couple of other things we're working on, UHC, higher education financing, many things where we are able to do sort of technical work that actually it wasn't being done before.
So are you the ones that then provided the technical support to the Ministry of Agriculture when they made the decision that there will be some growing, packaging and transporting of maize to Kenya from Zambia to support us with our current food security? What was the logic?
I actually haven't followed that conversation.
So that was not your docket?
I have not followed it. I'm not quite sure what that is about, to be honest. Because one has to know was that I know we are looking at all sorts of short-term interventions around the maize situation, which is quite dire. But I haven't followed that at all. We're doing different kind of work in agriculture. But the work we're doing in agriculture is more production work.
Okay, but not having followed the conversation doesn't mean you wouldn't have an opinion of it. Does it make sense that we are looking to Zambia when we have more arable land in Kenya to grow maize and to meet our deficit?
We don't have. Only 1/3 of Kenya is actually arable using rain-fed agriculture. One of the reasons why our maize yields have fallen is because we are moving maize production farther and farther away from arable areas to actually more to the rangelands. If you look at some of the places we are now growing maize, in Laikipia, those are rangelands. Yeah? But that's because we have actually very short of high potential agricultural land. We have the same land we had 40 years ago. Our population has grown 5 or 6-fold. And if you look at all the maize yields, our maize yields have stagnated for about 30 years at a very low level, 8 bags per acre. Or the potential is 30 bags per acre. So no, we don't have that much arable land. We're doing, one of the other things we're doing in agriculture is expanding irrigation. Irrigation is one of our big strategic interventions in agriculture. We currently have 700,000 acres of irrigated land on my portfolio, which we are developing now, pipeline. We have a pipeline to irrigate another 1 million acres. And that is something that I think we will be able to finance through private sort of partnerships within this term.
Would there be a business case for outsourcing farming to another country? I think is what I'm trying to get from you.
I actually not familiar with that, but I'll give you an example. Some of the people who are approaching us to invest in our irrigation are people who want to outsource their food security to us. The people
they want to outsource their food security to us?
Yes, the Gulf people. The UAE and Saudi Arabia and those people.
But it makes sense for them because of the amount of desert land that they have to
I think it makes... Zambia has a huge amount of arable land and a very fairly small population. They have more arable land than us. They have only 16 million people, and it's the most urbanized country in Africa. I think 70% of their population is urban. So if you're looking at a place where you can probably secure food supply, that is a place that I would look. But quite frankly, I am not in on that particular conversation.
Okay, because I was going to ask you how that is much cheaper than simply reclaiming some of our desert land here. And
no. Zambia has a huge... For example, I don't know whether you're aware that until the new president came in, we were importing virtually all our soybean for animal feed from Zambia. Then the new president came and actually suspended exports of soybean, and our prices have doubled. That's why animal feed has become so expensive. So we do have a lot of agricultural trade with Zambia.
Okay, I'll come back to you once you have more details on that. Why the delay of exchequer release to the counties, David Ndii? Bearing in mind, KRA tell us revenue collection is on track. You tell us we simply had a liquidity crunch in March, but counties have been facing that liquidity crunch since December. Same
reason. As I said, let's go back to what we said in the manifesto about a perfect storm. Look, let me take you back. What you're talking about in terms of that? I think I remember when I've written extensively and I wrote many things warning Jubilee about getting onto a dead beach. And the language I kept using, I said, look, we go this route. What you get into is something we call a debt treadmill. Or I've variously also used the language of a fiscal straitjacket. You have very little room to maneuver. Okay? When I was writing that in 2014-15, the interest payment on domestic debt was about 180 million shillings. This year, we have budgeted 680 million shillings.
On interest only, alone.
On domestic debt alone. Interest on foreign debt is another 180. So total interest is about $900 million. Now, you know, probably I'm sure you do, that debt is a first charge on the consolidated fund. So when your money comes in, the first thing you
and pensions and so
is
forth.
Debt, then pensions, then constitutional offices, international subscriptions. So that, unfortunately, is just the lay of the land for quite a while. That's the point I was trying to make. When we say that debt is consuming most of our money, it has implications on your cash flow. That's just the fact.
When you were here last time, a little over a month ago, you told us that when you got into office, we may have been headed the Ghana way, but the decisions that you've made, the decisions the Kwanzaa government has made, we've hopefully escaped that. Let me tell you a little bit about Ghana. In early 2022, Ghana's speaker then warned civil servants that they may be unable to pay salaries in the next 3 months. At the end of that year, they suspended payments on most of its external debt, effectively defaulting. If you cross over to Zambia, in 2019, there was a delay in civil servant salaries. 1 year later, Zambia defaulted on its Eurobond. One doesn't need to be an economist, David Ndii, to ask themselves, is Kenya headed in a similar direction, despite your interventions and your plan?
I first warned about our going the Zambia route in 2014. I think if you wrote one of the first columns I wrote, when this government came in and was increasing debt, its subtitle is Lessons from Ghana. So you're preaching to the choir again. The point is, yes. In fact, I remembered in December when I was in Washington for the US Summit, I may have mentioned this to you before, one of the World Bank chief economists for Africa in a conversation said that, no, we are looking at Kenya as the next Ghana. That was in December. So these conversations are not new. The markets have been expecting. They look at the countries with similar profiles of debt and potential debt distress, and we are there. That has not
So should last week's revelations worry us?
I don't even think they are last week's. I say we have been saying this all the time. I have said it so many times. What happened is the first thing that actually affected people directly. So this stood up and listened.
In my 40
but
years
my
as
point
a journalist,
was,
I've never covered delayed civil servants' salaries.
Actually, I'll tell you.
It is an oddity for me.
There's a point I made which I think was not one which people expected to be made. In the 90s, when we got to this point, how did we solve the problem? We retrenched civil servants. So that there are some realities that when we say that we have come in during a very severe financial crisis and we have to bite the bullet, I don't think that the point had gotten home. I hope it has, because we have to sober up as a country.
Is the administration that you serve ready to sober up on government spending? I
think it's very sober, but I can tell you this has also helped, because I'll be the first to admit that there are some excesses that we can do without. They are not large in terms of quantum, but in terms of signaling, they're bad.
Have you stipulated them
I
in a
raise
list
them
to
all
your
the time.
appointing authority?
I raise them. He raises them all the time as well. You reported it. If you recall, when we went to a retreat in Laikipia, in Mount Kenya, we went to a cabinet retreat. And there was a huge report that the president actually sent back a lot of people who had come to the meeting, and went into a closed door meeting with the team and the cabinet secretaries, and we had a very pointed conversation about those excesses. Yeah. So yes, but it's a culture. It's a culture that we have, and these are some of the, and I am quite agree with the criticism and that are pointed out by people, that we are not demonstrating frugality that is consistent with the message we are talking about, the situation we are in the economy.
So if we had the liquidity crunch we saw last week that led to the delay in civil servant salaries and other things, we are told there are other payments due in September or end of the year. Then there are bond payments due between now and end of the year. And there's a big Eurobond, $2.5 billion, I believe, $2 billion due in June next year.
Yes.
If we saw what we saw last week with smaller payments, what might Kenyans see?
Well, that is obviously that bond was issued in 2014. So if you come to government, you know about it, and it's one of the things that it's on our to-do list. And that's why, if you recall, when I was here last time, I told you one of the things that we've impressed upon the president is the importance of restoring confidence and credibility in the markets. Because bonds like that are not a problem normally, because you just refinance. And if your investors are holding those bonds, they are quite happy to hold them. But right now, the way the markets are, for frontier markets like ourselves, they are quite tough. For us, in fact, the rates had actually come down quite a bit. All our yield bonds were actually about 10% and below. And then, as I said, sometimes it's not your fault. A couple of banks went under in the US. Credit Suisse folded. And now if you look at the emerging market spreads, they are going up again. So this is how the financial world looks like. And yes, we are exposed, and we need to be very disciplined about this, and very deliberate about how we deal with our public finances. I believe we are doing it, and we are actually up to the task.
Speaking of discipline, there are those who question some of the tweets, David, that you put out, especially when you talk about markets, and markets would respond to a tweet by the President's Chief Economic Advisor. But there's a tweet that you put up just the other day, and we can have that tweet up, where you seem to insinuate, when someone asked you on the need to cut back on the bloated government, you actually stated, if push comes to shove, and we have that there, then a handshake is an option. How much do you think it will cost? And I think you are being questioned about the 50 CSs as well. And you stated it's the price of political stability. And the question that I want to ask you today, is the main purpose of a government survival and political stability, or is it the provision of common public goods and security for Kenyans, for voters?
Let me be honest with you, Wahiga, and Kenyans. And I want you Kenyans to listen to this very carefully. I had a ringside seat, and I watched Kibaki mismanage politics from 2003 to 2005. All that we did economically came to naught in 2007. It was foreseeable. Yeah? The lesson I learned from that is that the first duty of a government is political stability.
At the expense of taxpayers and ordinary
It is not
Kenyans.
An expense. If you then get the situation we got into 2007, what was more costly? We are still paying the price of 2007. And what Kibaki needed to do, and the Kibaki administration needed to do in 2003 wasn't much. What we had is bravado, hubris, yeah, and people just not being mature about the situation that we are facing. I think we are in a situation which is not dissimilar. Unfortunately,
15 years have passed. David,
it doesn't matter. Let me tell you, nothing has changed, because in 2007, we then established a precedent of rewarding bad political behavior. That when you lose elections, you cause a crisis, you go to the streets and all manner of things, and you get rewarded. We did it in 2007. We kind of did it again in 2017. So if you reward bad behavior, there is no accountability for it. It will be repeated every time. So the question we want to ask ourselves, having established that precedent and encouraged and have a system which rewards bad behavior, one is the question, you have a dilemma. You want to establish and ensure, otherwise democracy and elections don't make sense if all the time losers get are able to cause a bit of fracas and get some consolation prize. This is a conversation we need to have a country. Those people who are supporting this, for whatever reason, I see lots of people fanning the flames of this sort of thing, ought to ask themselves, who will pay the price? Because what happens is the more pressure the government is put under, the more it has to devote resources to political management. That's a fact. Unless it wants to just keel over and walk away from it. But that's a fact. That is the reality that it almost
the sum of some of the things you've told me this evening is that it sounds like you have the prescription for what a responsible government should be doing. But because of political considerations, concerns from the past and so forth, this government will not do some of those things, many of those things.
Governments operate within political constraints and political and institutional constraints and environment, and are only able to do the things. What you have to do is to design your program around your political reality. I think what we have here, there is a false notion out there that you can have a purely technocratic government, which implements things which are based on purely objective economic criteria. And then the contradiction about this is that this is an intensely political society. You can't actually do it. Because if these things people are calling technocratic, there is no economic policy that you can make that does not have distributional consequences. And those distributional consequences are political. There are winners and losers of any economic policy or resource allocation decision that you make. Yes, the original name of economics was political economy. That's what economics used to be. Because if you read all the books written on economics in the 19th century, they are called principles of political economy. You cannot divorce economic policy from politics.
David Ndii, I'm struggling to hear what you're saying on the back of the fact that, I mean, the president himself announces a 300 billion cut in the budget. We see that cut, but then in the supplementary budget, we see 287 billion now being added. And the net effect is savings of only 13 billion. So again, was that also due to political considerations?
No, I think what you're doing is wrong fiscal accounting.
Please educate me.
I told you from before, if you want to see budget movement, read the fiscal deficit. Okay? I explained to you that the purpose of the 300 billion shilling cut was to accommodate extra budgetary expenditures that had already been done. Some of the things you are reading that the controller of budget was talking about, we said those things are not going to be extra. Something else will have to give.
Okay.
So that we stay within the budget. So all the money that those people spent, extra budget, has been paid for by removing other things. So that you keep the budget deficit target at the same.
Is that the point where you then issue an alarm and say, because the situation that we found isn't what we expected, and we have these other, that even as much as we have savings on one end, we have had to accommodate other expenditure, that we must immediately implement an austerity plan because our books are worse than we thought. Kenyans are not.
We were on the previous government was on an austerity plan. It had an IMF program. I don't know why people think we are the ones who started the austerity plan. Yeah, it was on an IMF program. We just continuing, and what we have said, given how the state of the global financial markets and how exposed we are, then our plan has actually to be even more aggressive, a fiscal consolidation plan, than the one that government had agreed with the IMF. There is actually a clip I have seen from the IMF head of the Kenya mission. She's called Mary Goodman. You can look it up. She spoke in December and explained exactly at the end of that mission, when there was an approval to take the Kenya program approval to the board, she actually said exactly what I'm saying and talk about how the Ruto government has actually taken very bold steps to solve the program. So we were already on an austerity program.
In the midst of all the wastage that you speak of today, David Ndii, it sounds like it's not working. Something's failed. There
is nothing which has failed. That is the nature of government. There was no time I remember that government wasn't wasteful. The question is, what is our priority? As I said, our priority is not government. Our priority is economy. And the economy is not what happens in government. If you look at our 5 pillars in the manifesto, number 1 is agriculture, raising agricultural productivity. Crops are grown by farmers, not by civil servants. Even if civil servants didn't work one day, and we were able to support farmers to raise productivity, we would be fine. We have registered 5 million farmers since we came into office, so that we can have a platform for supporting farmers. We know where their land is, how much they have. We can geo-reference it. And we are going to build a completely new agricultural sort of support extension system around that. That's what we are using to distribute fertilizer for farmers. And if you ask farmers out there, have you been registered? They'll tell you yes. Did you get a voucher for fertilizer by SMS? Yes, we did. So again, people sitting in Nairobi don't probably know that. The second pillar is micro and small enterprise. That's the first thing we did. We did the Hustler Fund. 18 million people already onboarded, probably more now. 25 billion shillings already lent out. And that is not just about business. That provides a huge safety net for low-income people, because it means they cannot go hungry, because they didn't have some cash tonight, because there is something they can borrow from which is not punitive. Number 3, digital superhighway. That, again, is investment. I think there was an announcement by the World Bank that they are providing a facility to build that infrastructure. So that's going on. Again, it's out there. It's building infrastructure for creating digital and creative economy jobs. Number 4, housing. That's private capital predominantly. We just have to provide the structure for that private capital. And finally, the one thing which has got a lot of government is UHC. But if you look at what we have said, is that it is budget neutral. We are going to do it by reorganizing the way we spend money. Very few of those things actually require us to use a huge government bureaucracy.
David Ndii, as we begin to wind down this interview, a viewer here says, we've not been paid lump sum pensions since September. Retired civil servants are suffering. They also go on to say, no one in my village in Vihiga got the fertilizer, yet they're all registered.
Correct. I believe the reason for that is because of the limited resources. The targeting was mostly for this particular season was for maize growing areas. In the last short rains, the targeting was for the areas which actually plant mostly in the short rains, Mount Kenya, Ukambani, and others. So perhaps the communication hasn't been that whatever, but it's actually not possible logistically at this point, and we don't have the infrastructure to do it all at once nationally. And also resources, because we are only using the money that was already in the budget for fertilizer subsidies. There was 6 billion shillings in it. I think we were able to scramble some pieces, little money here and there to get to about 10 billion shillings.
David, when is the inflection point towards growth, towards recovery? Is it months? Is it years?
Well, we don't have a growth problem. If you look at all the reports, they'll tell you Kenya economy is one of the fastest growing economy We have maintained 5 to 6% growth. Those are very high growth rates.
Well, some question
all these years. There's nothing wrong with the numbers. The problem we have is our growth is not inclusive. Okay? It creates inequality. It doesn't create jobs, and it doesn't create, it is also inequality. So our bottom-up strategy is not about changing our growth rate, but it is about the structure of the economy so that growth is actually widely shared. And also there is more participation in generating that growth. Because if you look at the last decade, for example, growth has been driven primarily by debt-financed public infrastructure. We will say we want to shift from growth which is financed by infrastructure, public spending, to growth which is financed by production and productivity and employment. So it's not a question of recovery. I don't think that we actually need to increase growth.
So maybe the question should be, when might we see inclusive growth?
Well,
the one
I just said
jobs.
It's already happening. When we say we're getting an infrastructure that is able to get money to small businesses, when we say we've got an infrastructure that's able to get input to farmers, watch the next harvest from maize in August.
As we wind up, a viewer is asking, ask David Ndii, is there an option to, one, default on our debt to enable us to restructure the economy? And secondly, would we print more money as a possibility should the liquidity crunch continue?
Well, let me put it this way. One, let me distinguish between two things: insolvency and illiquidity. You restructure your debt when you're insolvent. That means even if you couldn't pay, we are not insolvent. Our debt is actually payable. We can finance payment. It's actually a significant sacrifice, but we are actually able to pay. Illiquidity means that I need cash today, but my cash is only available next week. And the reason why that is the case, typically government has no credit constraints. It is able to finance itself. That's why it uses treasury bills and bonds and all things to do. But for example, one of the things that actually affected, and fortunately we have been managed to get that now, in terms of raising international sort of money from the markets, is collapse of Credit Suisse. Those things have an impact. Yeah? Because then the markets get jittery. Then also, I say, the raising of our domestic, of our interest rates, the US rates and interest. So those things, but the idea, let me tell you what happens if you start restructuring debt now. You go where Zambia is, or where Ghana is. We are going to spend the next 3 or 4 years in very protracted debt restructuring negotiations.
So it's not a good idea?
Do absolutely nothing else. We would not deliver on anything else. It's a very bad idea.
Okay, I want to throw in 2 or 3 questions before we wrap up. A viewer here is asking, when can teachers who retired over a year ago expect their lump sum pension payments? And it ties in with lump sum pensions for retired civil servants. Is that anywhere in the horizon?
When our cash flow improves, and it's beginning to improve, I know, for example, these things you build on them. When we came in, you had a huge challenge with the dollars. That everybody knew. With fuel, we have stabilized the dollar. We have restored the interbank market. That means by the end of this month, actually, we hope we will probably have the interbank market working again. We will then be able. We have actually, I think, stabilized fuel prices over the next few months. That will also help, even until the harvest, we'll stabilize food prices.
Is it a 2023 answer or 2024?
There are no.
Your view?
It's incremental. For some reason, I was in the Kibaki administration. I did the economic recovery strategy. It took 3 years. People talk as if we came into government and everything's picked up immediately. Actually, it's actually towards the end of year 2. Actually, it's year 3 that you actually saw the recovery. And there was a lot more low-hanging fruit at the time than now.
So it could be 4 years, it could be 5 years.
There definitely is a turnaround that we will see in 18 months. Because like our focus on agriculture. Our primary focus, we have listed, if you go again to our manifesto, we have listed 5 key things that are sort of organizing our priorities. Cost of living, and that mostly is around food. Then the other one is budget, revenue, expanding our revenue base, because the way to sustainably deal with our debt is not to restructure it, but actually to expand our revenue base. We are now doing about 17% of GDP in revenue. It had fallen to about 14. But we used to do 22% of GDP. If you can get 20% of GDP, I think our repayment problem will have. Number 3, foreign exchange. Because
and I'll ask you to be brief. I have 2 more before.
Number 4, jobs, and number 5, inclusive growth.
Okay.
So we are going through those things systematically, but none of them actually. The one which gives you probably the quickest turnaround is going to be the cost of living.
And another viewer then asks,
6 months to a year, we should actually see a retreat in the cost of living.
In that 18 months, might there be a regularizing of payments to the counties? This has a whole spillover effect.
It's the same cash flow thing. I mean, that's why you want your cash flow to improve. We would like to be completely current on all our payments, but people don't like us to talk about some of the legacy things that we found. 600 billion shillings of pending bills. A road portfolio, unfinanced, 900 billion shillings. All the roads that were being given out here like confetti, those are now unfinanced contracts that are incurring pending bills. There's a whole, and then of course the irregular sort of extra budgetary spending that is now public, including Telcom, Kenya, and some military hospital that I keep passing there. I don't see any work, all sorts of things. So those things have a cost.
Some ask, was it really a surprise? David Ndii, surely you must have known at least 3/4 of what you've just told us you found was there to begin with. Many members of the Kenya Kwanza government were key in parliament and in the executive in the last government. They did not know that these...
Of course they knew, and they are responsible for many of these things. So, but here we are. You have to have a government. We had an election.
One viewer is asking, what is the value to taxpayers tonight of your economic council? One that is said to have taken up about 200 million or so in expenditure, vehicles and so forth.
I have not seen that money. I think there's a lot of fantastic
it was not raised
going on
by a request from your office?
People don't understand. But I think virtually most of that money is for an office. We don't have an office, by the way. And as I said, we need to strengthen the president's technical team in State House. I have a very old vehicle. It's outside here. You can see it. KC something. So there's obviously a lot of sensationalism, but clearly we need an office. Yeah. And it's for all the advisors. We have 7 economic, 2 from national security and human rights, and probably already a staff of approaching about 50 people. So I don't think that, and it's a one-off. So that's not really, government has establishment costs. How do you expect us to work? I've been working from, we work from just private offices, various places.
Can those establishment costs be forestalled in the midst of a liquidity crunch?
Well, how do you work?
Virtually? Using existing structures?
We meet at least a team of 10, 20 technical people from various ministries 2 or 3 times a week. Hey, there's some things which... This business has overhead. If you didn't have the studio, you wouldn't work.
Well, we're not using taxpayers' money.
Well, the government, that's why the taxpayers' money is there.
David, is it a revenue issue, as my last question, or a spending issue?
It's a debt issue. As I said...
The debt issue was always known.
No, the debt issue is new. We did not have a debt problem until about 10 years ago. I have written more than 20 articles about the debt that when Jubilee came into office, our debt to GDP ratio was 35%. Now it's going toward 70. I said the domestic interest was 180 billion shillings. It's now 700 billion. Our external debt to export ratio was less than 5%. Now it's approaching 30%. That is crisis levels. It's a debt issue. Why is this debt? It financed all this infrastructure that Kenyans demand.
And my last question, you write your own tweets?
Yes, I do.